Hello, my name is Hassan Sorrells, and this is the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast, Shorts. There's no co-host on these Shorts episodes. These are now around 6 to 8 minute long observations, ideas, thoughts, or rants about the literature, philosophy, psychology, and even the theology of leadership. Because listening to me talk about leadership for now around 6 to 8 minutes is still better than reading and trying to understand yet another business book. Even that business book that has been sitting in your Amazon queue that you just haven't been able to bring yourself to purchase for around the last 6 months. The fact of the matter is, the only way to resist the more Kafkaesque aspects of our modern online society and culture is to look to the Karens for guidance. But first, a definition. From a 2020 article from the online political and cultural magazine The Week by Matthew Walther, we get this definition of a Karen. And I quote, "The first thing that ought to be said about Karen is that she is a product of her times, an indelible Gen Xer, equally removed from the self-justifying antinomian spirit of her boomer parents and the ennui of her children. What equipment did Karen bring to parenting at the end of history, to the unheralded cultural revolution she had not asked for? Her neat handwriting, her hatred of bad manners, her unthinking sense of duty, her consistent expectations. Karen's occasionally harsh treatment of strangers without regard for race or class is refreshingly egalitarian. Karen did not question the underlying assumptions of the age in which she lived. She did not regret her life choices. She did not understand why the world was like this. It would be a great mistake to identify Karen with lean-in archetypes or cliches about well-behaved women seldom making history. Karen is not particularly interested in history. Instead, to the extent that she reflects upon her life and conduct, a luxury rarely, if ever, afforded, she sees herself as an unremarkable person, not a passive personality. She believes very firmly in individual agency, but someone who with quiet dignity, does what she thinks best according to her station in life, and does so without making any unnecessary fuss, at least so long as others are willing to do the same. Women like Karen do not, in fact, make history, but they do allow civilization to continue just a while longer on the backs of those like themselves, whose reward is all too often omnidirectional spite." Close quote. Now that's all well and good, but let us also take a moment to define another term today. Kafkaesque used to be everywhere and used everywhere by quote-unquote normal people, like the terms Orwellian or Dickensian are used now by those who are quote-unquote in the know. But as the literacy level of our overall Western culture has declined somewhat precipitously, the use of the term Kafkaesque it has also begun to sunset. Even weirdly enough, as our existences online and in the ever-expanding and acidic social media space have come to resemble more and more exactly the kind of environment Franz Kafka was trying to get at with his writing. From the Atlantic Online, another quote by writer Joel Fasler from 2014, he wrote that, quote, "Kafka's name has entered the language in a way no other writers has," said Frederick Carl, one of Kafka's major biographers in 1991. The word is even in the title of an episode of Breaking Bad. Carl called the word, quote, "the representative adjective of our times," but also complained about its misuse. "What I'm against," he said, "is someone going to catch a bus and finding that all the buses have stopped running and saying, that's Kafkaesque. That's not." Close quote. Kafka's quintessential qualities are affecting use of language, a setting that straddles fantasy and reality, and a sense of striving, even in the face of bleakness, hopelessly and full of hope. Close quote from Joe Fassler. Okay, so we've got an idea of Karens, we've got an idea of Kafkaesque tendencies, or at least a working definition of what is Kafkaesque versus what's not, like not catching a bus. But where do those two ideas overlap, and why should leaders even care? Well, if you spend too much time on Twitter and TikTok, or too much time listening to a certain type of podcast, not this one, You could be forgiven for believing that Western culture and society is irredeemably falling apart and disintegrating into madness, chaos, and confusion, and is unsavable. Except, not everyone in the world, matter of fact, most people who listen to this podcast, not everyone in the world buys into such a narrative. And even though their resistance to such narratives may come in the form of asking to see the manager or demanding that their children adopt certain standards of behavior and posture towards work and the world, such positions do not make the holder of those positions incorrect in the face of cultural decline. They might be annoying. They might be meddlesome. They might indeed be spitting in the wind. But in the face of bleakness, the act of striving against hopelessness, even in the small things, may be Kafkaesque, but it might also be the only possible response to a narrative, a dominant narrative, that insists on material deconstruction and spiritual nihilism. And the ideas that underlie such a dominant narrative in the West must also be confronted and defeated. The massive problem with Nietzsche and all of his ilk was that he and they failed to understand that other people get a vote. The massive problem with Marxist theories of reality and culture that have long dominated our academic discourse is that they underestimate the power of actual on-the-ground human striving. The massive problem with French deconstructionism and all of the acidic rot that it has wrought is that, well, people who don't buy into that and people who do are biologically wired to birth, build, and to grow, not to endlessly deconstruct and then die. Particularly women and men are biologically wired to birth, build, and grow. So what does this have to do with Karens? Well, leaders look to the Karens for guidance and resistance of nihilistic narratives in the small things on a daily basis. Call them out and deconstruct them by merely doing those small things. Small acts of neat handwriting, small acts of customer service, small acts of demanding to see the manager. And if you're on the other end of that, be the manager who solves a problem for a customer rather than looking at the problem being the presence of the customer herself. And well, today, that's it for me. Thank you for listening and subscribing to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast. If you're listening to this on any of the major podcast players, like iTunes, Google Podcasts, or Spotify, please go ahead and leave us a 5-star review and write a little bit in there. A couple of sentences is good enough. That actually helps us game those algorithms that I was just maybe addressing. And, of course, it helps us grow the show. Tell all your family, tell all your friends, and tell the leaders in your life that you know that need to be listening to this show that this show exists. By the way, if you want to get started on the leadership path yourself, or you know some people who need to go on the leadership path, HSCT Publishing, the home company of Leadership Toolbox and Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast, can help you and your team do that. So check out our training webinars, coaching services, and more at leadershiptoolbox.us. We are remote, we're live, we're in person, we're on video, and we've got leadership development solutions for your civic group, nonprofit staff, public sector staff, or even your private sector leaders. And of course, you're going to want to check out our video-based subscription service at leadingkeys.com. That's leadingkeys.com for leadership development on demand. You don't like videos, you don't like training, but you really like the podcast? Well, I would also recommend reading a book. Matter of fact, I'd recommend reading my most recent book, 12 Rules for Leaders, The Foundation of Intentional Leadership. You can get that in paperback, hardcover, or as an ebook on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, Ingram Spark, and any other place that you order books online. Finally, of course, we're on YouTube just like everybody else is. We'd love to have you help us grow the YouTube channel, so like and subscribe to the video version of this podcast on the HSCT Publishing channel on YouTube. Just search for HSCT Publishing, or you can search for Leadership Toolbox and hit the subscribe button. Subscribing helps us grow the show, as it does with the audio, just is the same with the video. All right, that's it for me.